Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in. I am Lucas Tietzen, and this is Blues News Media. And today we are going to talk about a paper that we have mentioned briefly in the past in a video called Riding into Lockstep. If you have not watched that video yet, I encourage you to go ahead and stop this and go watch that and then come back here because I think it was a rather good episode talking about what we're going to be discussing today, this paper, this Rockefeller paper back from 2010, and the onset of the George Floyd riots that were sweeping not just the nation, but the world not too long ago. And instead of just giving a taste of what Lockstep was about, I thought it would be beneficial to read the entire thing here with you today and see the irresimilarities between what was written about and predicted back in 2010 by the Rockefeller Foundation and what's going on right now. It's almost a mirror image. And I don't know if they had a crystal ball or were just saying plans out loud, but it's very suspicious. So we're going to jump right in and read the first part of this paper called Lockstep. And naturally, I'll have this in the show notes for everybody to go read, which I strongly encourage you to do so. But the paper itself is called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. And once again, this was made in or released in May 2010, so a little over 10 years ago. But not only today, but I'm thinking the next few episodes, we're going to go over each part of this paper. There's only 4 of them, so we'll get part of it done today at least. The first one is Lockstep. Next, we would do Clever Together, Hack Attack, and Smart Scramble. I've already read through all of these, and it was very fascinating, but I want to make sure I take my time and get all of the weird similarities of today written out for you all. But right here is Lockstep. And just opening right up, we're going to dive right in. And it opens with, in 2012, the pandemic that the world had been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain, it's a weird similarity there, originating from wild geese, was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months. The majority of these healthy young adults. And especially at the beginning of this whole pandemic here, they were predicting that 80% of the people would get infected and 35 million would die. So there's a similarity right there. And as always, good old Billy Boy Gates was warning of such a deadly disease, warning about it all the way back in 2017. Thank God for Bill Gates. Without him, how would we ever predict these things? It continues with, the pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. And that's going on right now. The pandemic blanketed the planet, though disproportionate numbers died in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America, where the virus spread like wildfire in the absence of official containment protocols. But even in developed countries, containment was a challenge. The United States' initial policy of strongly encouraging citizens from flying proved deadly in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus not just within the United States, but across borders. However, a few countries did fare better. China, in particular. The Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. And we certainly saw that in the media. China, drop of a dime, locks down the nation, and people in the pesky Western societies that have these delusions of freedom and liberty, well, we're seeing a huge toll being taken on those sorts of countries because they have this idea of freedom and it gets in the way. But continues with China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperatures at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. And if you have one eye, one ear can read Braille, two brain cells to rub together, you know this is going on right now. There's a huge push going on right now trying to make mandatory face masks the new normal, as they like to call it. This one's probably, well dated now, unfortunately, but these are the states requiring people to wear masks when out in public. You got some big ones. You got California, you got New Mexico, Hawaii, Illinois, Michigan. I know recently, if I'm not mistaken, Texas has been added to that list, which is just shocking. Texas, it's supposed to be gun touting freedom, is being mandated to wear a mask. Medical freedom is an archaic idea at this point. But not only that, you also have thermal imaging becoming the new normal. I know in my neck of the woods here, I live in the Milwaukee area, and this is a very well-known grocery store, but they are now putting up thermal imaging cameras to see if you come walking in with a fever, which we all know is just really arbitrary malarkey, since a lot of people are asymptomatic and don't even show signs like a fever. It's not about protecting you. It is really, more than anything, about getting you used to not being in control of your own body, of your own faith. You're being conditioned. You're being broken down right now. While they, of course, claim that, well, this is for your own good. We got to save somebody, anybody, even though we don't have any proof that these measures are going to work. We at least have to try, even at the risk of destroying the global economy and sending millions of people into poverty. Otherwise, we're monsters. But even after, this says, even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. Which I'm sure we'll see this come to fruition without a doubt, but never do I ever want to hear people say, it's just for now, they'll roll back these measures once everything has passed. You're just being crazy, you're being paranoid. No, the state, once they take control, never gives it up. But in order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics, transnational terrorism, to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power, because it was never about the virus. At first, the notion of a more controlled world gained wide acceptance and approval. I'm looking at you, all those Karens out there ratting people out. Citizens willingly gave up some of their sovereignty and their privacy to more paternalistic states in exchange for greater safety and stability. Citizens were more tolerant and even eager for top-down direction and oversight, and national leaders had more latitude to impose order in the ways they saw fit. In developed countries, this heightened oversight took many forms, like biometric IDs for all citizens, for example, which really is not new. We go here, I mean, this was last year, September of last year, and if I'm not mistaken, September 20th, this was right around the time another pandemic war game was being conducted called Urban Outbreak at the Naval War College, if I'm not mistaken. But as they are saying, oh, there could be this widespread virus that could wreak havoc on the population, they're also coming out and saying ID 2020 and partners launch program to provide digital ID with vaccines. And we're just going to go ahead and read a little bit of this one. The ID 2020 Alliance has launched a new digital identity program at its annual summit in New York in collaboration with the government of Bangladesh Vaccine Alliance Gavi, mainly funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and new partners in government, academia, and humanitarian relief. The program to leverage immunization as an opportunity to establish digital identity was unveiled by ID 2020 in partnership with the Bangladesh government's Access to Information program, the Directorate General of Health Services and Gavi, according to the announcement. Digital identity is a computerized record of who a person is stored in a registry. It is used in this case to keep track of who has received a vaccine. Even though we crazy conspiracy theorists have been saying that they're going to use this ID 2020 to link it with your vaccine record to make it so that we know if you are allowed to go in a grocery store, if you are allowed to go to, say, a sporting event. Are you allowed? I got something in my eye. Because if you don't get your vaccine, well, you're a public threat. You could hurt anybody at any time, even though you were lied to, and this virus does not spread as easily as you were led to believe. So, we know that biometric IDs for citizens, they're coming, they're here, they've been talked about already. We have tighter regulations of key industries whose stability was deemed vital to national interests. And I don't know if any of you remember Trump announcing that national, the Defense Production Act, allowing the government to basically hijack the market, the free market, to provide whatever they need in the name of national security and the public interest, of course. In many developed countries, enforced cooperation with a suite of new regulations and agreements slowly but steadily restored both order and, importantly, economic growth. Across the developing world, however, the story was different and much more variable. Top-down authority took different forms in different countries, hinging largely on the capacity, caliber, and intentions of their leaders. In countries with strong and thoughtful leaders, citizens' overall economic status and quality of life increased. In India, for example, air quality drastically improved after 2016 when the government outlawed high-emitting vehicles. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. First and foremost, if you've been following what's been going on in India right now, my heart goes out to them. You thought America was bad with a lot of the police brutality that was going on. Well, this came out late March. India's coronavirus lockdown is bringing the worst in its police force. And I'll leave this, I'll link it up in the show notes for you to go and read yourselves. Please go out and do your own research and watch some of the horrifying videos that were taking place. They were beating the hell out of people with sticks. They were making them roll in the street like dogs. They were being broken. They were being conditioned. Their crime being out when the holy, powerful lords of the land said, you can't be out. That was their punishment, trying to live their lives, which I believe is their right. But naturally, don't worry, their quality of life is improving. And I don't know if you noticed this, it also said, that air quality has increased. And we'll get into that later on uh, about the environmental aspect of the coronavirus and how that's going to be used and utilized in the media quite a bit. But it also talks about how the government in this scenario outlawed high emitting vehicles. So they were taking vehicles off the market. Now, that's kind of scary because, as I'm going to show you right here, this is a wonderful article from Whitney Webb. She's writing for The Last American Vagabond. I know I've referenced their work a lot. If you have not started following them, why not? You got to. They are the cream of the crop, the bee's knees when it comes to independent investigative journalism. But this story that Whitney Webb wrote, Techno-Tyranny, How the U.S. National Security State is Using Coronavirus to Fulfill an Orwellian Vision. It's a long one. It's chock full of information. There's a link to the Freedom of Information request right here for you to view. But it basically talks about how the United States set up a group called the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and basically says China, it's evolving really fast in the artificial intelligence realm. We need to move into that market, and we need to own it. We need to be the best of the best. Otherwise, Canada, China is going to be the one that pulls away. They're going to accelerate at an insane pace and dominate the realm of artificial intelligence. Well, that won't do. So how does America do that? And they talk about this. They need to adopt this widespread dragnet surveillance state and completely utilize artificial intelligence in the same dystopian way China is using it. But one of the things that they talk about getting rid of in this little scenario presentation here that Whitney Webb wrote about was getting rid of old legacy systems. And one of those among them was car ownership. And even in 2010, they're predicting that the government will have the capability to just take cars off the road. Sure, high emitting ones, but if you give power an inch, they generally take a mile. So I thought that was interesting, and I'm going to link this article up in the show notes for you as well. But it continues with, in Ghana, the introduction of ambitious government programs to improve basic infrastructure and ensure the availability of clean water for all her people led her to a sharp decline in waterborne diseases. And that's another thing. Why is there always a push for vaccines to take care of all these diseases and viruses if we just focused on cleaning up the environment, eating healthily, providing clean water for people? That will drastically have an effect on the diseases of the world. But I digress. But more authoritarian leadership worked less well, and in some cases, tragically, in countries run by irresponsible elites who use their increased power to pursue their own interests at the expense of their citizens. You don't say. There were other downsides, as the rise of virulent nationalism and created new hazards. Spectators at the 2010 World Cup, for example, wore bulletproof vests that sported a patch of their national flag. Strong technology regulations stifled innovation, kept costs high, and curbed adoption. In the developing world, access to approved technologies increased, but beyond that remained limited. The locus of technology innovation was largely in the developed world, leaving many developing countries on the receiving end of technologies and others considered best for them. Some governments found this patronizing and refused to distribute computers and other technologies that they scoffed at as second-hand. Meanwhile, developing countries with more resources and better capacity began to innovate internally to fill these gaps on their own. Meanwhile, in the developed world, the presence of so many top-down rules and norms greatly inhibited entrepreneurial activity. Scientists and innovators were often told by governments what research lines to pursue and were guided mostly toward projects that would make money, like market-driven product development, or were sure bets, like fundamental research, leaving more risky or innovative research areas largely untapped. Well-off countries and monopolistic companies with big research and development budgets still made significant advances, but the IP behind their breakthroughs remained locked behind strict national or corporate protection. Russia and India imposed stringent domestic standards for supervising and certifying encryption-related products and their suppliers, a category that in reality meant all IT innovations. The United States and the European Union struck back with retaliatory national standards, throwing a wrench in the development and diffusion of technology globally. Especially in the developing world, acting in one's national self-interest often meant seeking practical alliances with those interests, whether it was gaining access to needed resources or banding together in order to achieve economic growth. In South America and Africa, regional and sub-regional alliances became more structured. Kenya doubled its trade with southern and eastern Africa as new partnerships grew within the continent. China's investment in Africa expanded as the bargain of new jobs and infrastructure in exchange for access to key materials or food exports proved agreeable to many governments, and that's happening a lot right now too. Cross-border ties proliferated in the form of official security, while the deployment of foreign security teams was welcome in some of the most dire failed states. One-size-fits-all solutions yielded few positive results. By 2025, people seem to be growing weary of so much top-down control and letting leaders and authorities make choices for them. And I do want to say, this was written in 2010. It talks about how in 2012 is when the pandemic hits. If you think you are seeing unrest right now, you haven't seen anything yet. Society can and most probably will be incredibly disrupted. It is written. Wherever national interests clashed with individual interests, there was conflict. Sporadic pushback became increasingly organized and coordinated as disaffected youth and people who had seen their status and opportunity slip away, largely in developing countries, incited civil unrest, which is violent, isn't it? And you're going to see a lot of that. Black Lives Matter, though millions of people had seemed to participate, it was very, for the most part, cool, calm, collected. Sure, you had your people that went out and were burning stuff down. You had your cops that were going and cracking skulls, which you'll see a lot more of that. But otherwise, it was mainly peaceful. As people start to have their economic opportunities pulled away, their food security pulled away, their ideas of their future pulled away, ripped up, burned, and disintegrated before their very eyes, they're going to get a lot more, coordinated and aggressive. In 2026, protesters in Nigeria brought down the government, fed up with the entrenched cronyism and corruption. Even those who liked the greater stability and predictability of this world began to grow uncomfortable and constrained by so many tight rules and by the strictness of national boundaries. The feeling lingered that sooner or later, something would inevitably upset the neat order that the world's governments had worked so hard to establish. And look at how they just paint that at the end. The feeling lingered that sooner or later, something would inevitably upset the neat order that the world's governments have worked so hard to establish. You see, you and me, we're the problem. We're the ones that are ungrateful. We don't see the grand master plan. We weren't bred for that. We weren't educated for that. We just walk around, work, eat, sleep, and then we get these ideas of, well, maybe my future is being robbed from me. Maybe my kids are going to be left out in the cold and have no future to speak of. And you maybe want to stand up about it, speak out about it, maybe organize with people about it, and yeah, rock the boat. But of course, that is going to upset the neat order, the order that you need, that needs to be crafted by central planners and thrown down at your feet, and you are told to accept. Well, I don't accept it. It seems disturbing. But that was basically the written scenario of Lockstep. But they do have a little bit more here, like some big headlines. Everybody loves headlines. Starts in 2010. So what happens? What do they think happens as things start to progress after this oddly predicted pandemic? Pandemic. Well, in 2013, quarantine restricts in-person contact. Cellular networks overloaded. So maybe in the future, we're going to see a very tight strain on the internet. But quarantine restricts in-person contact. Hell, that's happening now. People are so well conditioned, they make sure to stay 6 feet away from people. In 2015, intercontinental trade hit by strict pathogen controls. In 2017, Italy addresses immigrant caregiver gap with robots. And I was talking about this before. You're going to see a lot of automation start to come in and fill a lot of jobs. I know one of the parts, one aspect I was thinking about was that even as people are going to fall into this weird OCD kind of mindset where you need to be absolutely clean 100% of the time, and so do all of your surroundings, you would at least think the custodial industry would explode with a lot of jobs. Except we've been seeing a lot of robots that walk around with light and are able to disinfect things just like that. So even that way, you will not be able to get a job. Continues with, in 2018, while Africa's embrace of authoritarian capitalism a la China continue? Yes. In 2022, Vietnam to require a solar panel on every home. That's an episode for another day. The sustainable development scam. Proliferating trade networks in Eastern and Southeastern Africa strengthen regional ties. And in 2028, African leaders fear repeat of Nigeria's 2026 government collapse. But there you have it. But let's see. What's the role of philanthropy? What are they all about? The people like the ultra rich, they've always have our backs. They've always are trying to look out for us. How can they help in this scenario? Let's read and find out. Philanthropic organizations will face hard choices in this world. Given the strong role of governments, doing philanthropy will require heightened diplomacy and the ability to operate effectively in extremely divergent environments. Philanthropy, grantee, and civil society relationships will be strongly moderated by government, and some foundations might choose to align themselves more closely with national official development assistance, strategies, and government objectives. Larger philanthropies will retain an outsized share of influence, and many smaller philanthropies may find value in merging financial, human, and operational resources. Again, let's just unpack this sentence real quick. Large philanthropies, like people like Bill Gates, the ultra rich that need to clean up their image by donating some money, are going, in the midst of all this, in the midst of a pandemic and civil unrest, are going to retain a large, outsized share of influence. Doesn't that concern anybody? Unelected, ultra-rich people throwing the money around to gain influence? Even the most normal of normies can probably agree that that's a little sketchy. That's more than a little worrisome. And many smaller philanthropies, no less, may find value in merging financial, human, and operational resources with the big fish. At least that way they won't get eaten, right? Regardless, it continues with philanthropic organizations interested in promoting universal rights and freedoms will get blocked at many nations' borders. Developing smart, flexible, and wide ranging relationships in this world will be key. Some philanthropies may choose to work only in places where their skills and services don't meet resistance, where they don't get questioned. Many governments will place severe restrictions on the program areas and geographies that international philanthropies can work in, leading to a narrower and stronger geographic focus or grant making in their home country only. And they have, in each one of these that we're going to go over, they have the headline section, they have the role of philanthropy section, and we're going to read all of that. But it's nice of them, even as they put out this paper, they at least kept in mind, how will the ultra rich influence society? I mean, politics is all but a joke, so this is probably an easier way for them to, utilize their control while being praised as heroes. But last, and certainly not least, we have this here, technology in Lockstep. And we're just going to skip down to right here. What are some of the technology trends that are going to go hand in hand with a possible pandemic or civil unresty kind of world? Oh, wait. I'm sorry, that's already happening, isn't it? Well, let's see. You have scanners using advanced functional magnetic resonance imaging technology become the norm at airports and other public areas to detect abnormal behavior that may indicate antisocial intent. Does that kind of chill your bones at all? Not only will they, again, in public places, try to normalize you being watched and monitored at all times, like we see, make sure here, thermal imaging, just going to be the new normal. It's just going to be accepted, but also they're going to see your behavior. Are you acting strange? Whether it's you're wiping your head a lot because you're sweating because you may have the old COVID, or are you acting sketchy, weird? Are you going to be a threat to society in some other sense, like they have already been planning for? Well, skip, like here. Pentagon wants AI to predict behavioral changes in troops. I'll just read a bit of this for you here. When a teammate is struggling with depression, mental health, or other psychological issues, it can have a debilitating effect on the entire team. During a military operation, those issues, if left unaddressed, can lead to mission failure, injury, or death. To prevent mental health issues from becoming a problem on the battlefield, Defense Innovation Unit, a team within the Defense Department that taps non-traditional contractors to bring the latest technologies to the military, wants to develop predictive artificial intelligence that can flag behavior changes in a service member. And if you think it's just going to stop with the Army, you are sadly mistaken. And this is what they're talking about. This was back in the beginning of May, that they have artificial intelligence programs that can literally just watch you, just take in your data, and are able to decide whether or not, I'm sorry, how do you put it, if they have antisocial intent. They're not just coming for your body temperature. They're coming for your entire being. Your entire existence is going to be tracked, recorded, stored, analyzed, and then you'll probably be approached depending on how much you step out of line, even when you don't know it. Another technology trend is, in the aftermath of pandemic scares, smarter packaging for food and beverages is applied first by big companies and producers in a business-to-business environment, and then adopted for individual products and consumers. New diagnostics are developed to detect communicable diseases. The application of a health screening also changes. Screening becomes a prerequisite for release from a hospital or prison, successfully slowing the spread of many diseases. And we see this here. Again, this from the same website, nextgov.com. But this was back in October 24th, 2019, when this was written. Military algorithm can predict illness 48 hours before symptoms show. And now they have new rings that a lot of healthcare workers are wearing to see if they're showing any signs of a sickness, are going to become sick before they show signs. And this came back again, October 24th, 2019, right before it, even they came out with the Event 201, where they predicted another novel coronavirus spreading through the world, although this one came from, I think it was bats that were eaten by pigs, that were then eaten by humans, that started in Brazil, but still spread across the world and killed a bunch of people, just like how Billy Boy Gates was warning about for years at this point. But this is not new. They've already been talking about this, and now they're rolling it out. Predictive programming. First they whisper it, and next thing you know, they start to slowly roll it out. You have telepresence technologies respond to the demand for less expensive, lower bandwidth, sophisticated communication systems for populations whose travel is restricted. And then you also have, driven by protectionism and national security concerns, nations create their own independent, regional defined IT networks mimicking China's firewalls. Again, they're going to keep praising the Chinese model of how governments should conduct themselves. Strong authoritarian ways that restrict not only the individual's right to movement, but also right to access information. Governments have varying degrees of success in policing internet traffic, but those efforts nevertheless fracture the World Wide Web. They are coming after World Wide Web. They're coming after your internet. Do you get it? I don't know about you. I utilize the internet more than looking at, I don't know, what do people go on there for now? Social media sites, Netflix, and things of that nature. The majority of my utilizing of the grand instrument that is the internet is accessing information on these psychopathic people that rule our society. And they're going to come after your ability to access that information. They're going to break up the internet. Probably in the same kind of area how they were talking about in this paper also, that regional powers will start to take form and grow stronger. And within those regional powers, I betcha they're going to draw the internet lines. It's all coming. They've already baked it into the cake for you. Nobody just bothered to look. And then the last part, I forgot there was one more part after this. So they've also have these little, fictional writings of people living in this fun, new, trendy future, and it's all really cool and happy. It was really sad until a strong authoritarian top-down measures came in, but now we're happy. So we're going to go ahead and read this real quick and send you all on your way. And this is Life in Lockstep. Manisha gazed out on the Ganges River, and if I pronounce anything wrong, I strongly apologize. Mesmerized by what she saw, back in 2010, when she was 12 years old, her parents had brought her to this river so that she could bathe in its holy waters. But standing at the edge, Manisha had been afraid. It wasn't the depth of the river or its currents that had scared her, but the water itself. It was murky and brown and smelled pungently of trash and dead things. Manisha had balked, but her mother had pushed her forward, shouting that this river flowed from the lotus feet of Vishnu and she should be honored to enter it, along with millions of Hindus. Her mother believed the Ganges water could cleanse a person's soul of all its sins and even cure the sick. So Manisha had grudgingly dunked herself in the river, accidentally swallowing water in the process and receiving a bad case of giardia, and months of diarrhea as a result. Remembering that experience as what made today so remarkable, it was now 2025. Manisha was 27 years old and a manager for the Indian government's Ganges Purification Initiative. Until recently, the Ganges was still one of the most polluted rivers in the world. Its coliform bacteria levels astronomical due to the frequent disposal of human and animal corpses and of sewage, back in 2010, 89 million liters per day, directly into the river. Dozens of organized attempts to clean the Ganges over the years had failed. In 2009, the World Bank even loaned India $1 billion to support the government's multi-billion-dollar cleanup initiative. But then the pandemic hit, and that funding dried up. But what didn't dry up was the government's commitment to cleaning the Ganges. Now not just an issue of public health, but increasingly one of national pride. Manisha had joined the GPI in 2020, in part because she was so impressed by the government's strong stance on restoring the ecological health of India's most treasured resource. Many lives in her home city of Jaipur had been saved, but the government's quarantines had been saved by the government's quarantines during the pandemic, and that experience, thought Manisha, had given the government the confidence to be so strict about the river usage now. How else could they get millions of Indian citizens to completely shift their cultural practices in relationship to a holy site? Right there. I mean, if that's not just incredibly disturbing. You see here, if it wasn't for the government, during this pandemic enforcing quarantines, the world would be destroyed. It gave them the confidence to enact strict measures, so much so they wanted to socially condition Indian citizens to completely shift their mindset from cultural practices with the holy site. If that's not the most horrifying thing, I don't know what is. But I do want to make this point real quick before we continue. That as we get more farther removed from this coronavirus thing, you're going to see this preached a lot more. As COVID-19 forces world to quarantine, air quality has improved. They're going to make this point a lot. Look at how nice the world was when we humans just tucked away in our corners. Look at how much the earth healed and the animals came back. And I'm not saying that doesn't need to happen. It does. We need to have a more beautiful, holistic experience and coexistence with nature, Mother Gaia, and stop plundering it and blowing it to smithereens and poisoning everything that we touch. But we do not do that by demonizing the human, the person, society. If we do that, what the hell's the point? Anyway, discarding ritually burned bodies in the Ganges was now illegal, punishable by years of jail time. Companies found to be dumping waste of any kind in the river were immediately shut down by the government. There were also severe restrictions on where people could bathe and where they could wash clothing. Every 20 meters along the river was marked by a sign outlining the repercussions of disrespecting India's most treasured natural resource. Of course, not everyone liked it. Protests flared up every so often, but no one could deny that the Ganges was looking more beautiful and healthier than ever. Manisha watched as an engineering team began unloading equipment on the banks. Many top Indian scientists and engineers had been recruited by the government to develop tools and strategies for cleaning the Ganges in more high-tech ways. Her favorite were the submersible bots that continually swam the river to detect, through sensors, the presence of chemical pathogens. And guess what? That's been a thing too. See here, March 14th, this came out. American researchers want to fill the oceans with sensors and make it a sort of ocean of things, similar to the Internet of Things, of anybody that follows the 5G horror show that is unfurling across the world right now and is going to make the ultimate surveillance state. But that's not cool and hip and normal to talk about. But even then, getting back to this here, they want to put sensors all across the ocean so that they can sense anything and everything and take in all that information so that nowhere is safe. There is no safe harbor through the technocratic surveillance grid. Brought to you by DARPA. So it's just weird how they kind of called that out as well. I don't know about you. That was kind of suspicious, if you ask me. But new riverside filtration systems that sucked in dirty river water and spit out far cleaner water were also impressive, especially because on the outside they were designed to look like mini temples. In fact, that's why Manisha was at the river today to oversee the installation of a filtration system located not even 100 feet from where she first stepped into the Ganges as a girl. The water looks so much cleaner now, and recent tests suggested that it might even meet drinkability standards by 2035. Manisha was tempted to kick off her shoe and dip her toe in, but this was a restricted area now, and she, of all people, would never break the law. I'm sure we have nothing to look into with that. Don't touch, don't commune with nature. That's criminal. And I think that's scary. So, thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed going over Lockstep. It's often mentioned now in the alternative media, but I thought it would be important to go over some of the itty bitty little details that often get overlooked and see how these sorts of crazy scenarios we talked about 10 years ago are now coming into fruition. It's almost as if it's either a crazy coincidence or it was planned. But that's just my opinion. As always, I'm going to put this in the show notes and everything that we referenced here for your viewing pleasure. Please go read each and every one of them. And remember to share this episode if you liked it. Share, like, subscribe, anything and everything that you can do to help support and grow this show is greatly appreciated. And I gotta say, all the subscribers and the goodwill that is being thrown at this series, it's incredibly heartwarming, and I hope to continue, and I hope you continue to enjoy it because I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. But as always, I am Lucas Tietzen of Blues News Media, and if you do take one thing away from this, hopefully it'll be this: ignorance isn't bliss.